mild-mannered appearance before you today, you may find it hard to believe that I am really a young, hip urbanite. You don't believe me? It's true. It's true. I even have a hip name to prove it. It's Chappy Dog. I have to say it like that, Chappy Dog. I don't know what that means, but that's how you say it. And I am so young, hip, and urban, I even know what brother from another mother means. And I had to look it up on Urban Dictionary. And it means a friend that is so close, he's like a brother, though obviously from another mother. Should be spoken like you're straight out of Compton. Yo, brother from another mother, what's happening? So have I got you convinced that I'm a young, hip urbanite? No?
Of course.
Of course. Well, actually my name didn't come from life on the streets. It was given to me by a coworker after our team's music therapist did a rap song, and everybody on the team got a young, hip urban name. And knowing a few slang terms doesn't make you a young, hip urbanite any more than standing in a car or standing in a garage makes you a car. And I think we can all understand this difference between the outer appearance and the inner appearance. And we say it all the time when sayings like you can't judge a book by its cover, and appearances can be deceiving. And even the little children's rhyme, sticks and stones can break my bones, but words will never hurt me. Which makes my point, but isn't true at all. Our world still struggles with seeing and reacting to skin color and gender and economic status and so many other external characteristics rather than seeing each person as they really are, rather than seeing a common humanity. And we still fight wars and build walls and we shoot each other based on these superficial things, and we create this us versus them world. We group ourselves with those that we think we have the most in common with in order to create some safety in numbers, and then we point and we blame and we vilify those that are outside of our group. And one thing that the Jewish and Christian scriptures do very, very well is they show us that things haven't changed. This is the way things were in our reading, and they're the way things still are today. This passage today from the book of Genesis is the ending of the story of Hagar and Ishmael, which is a central part of the much bigger story of Abraham and how he was the forebearer of the Jews, of God's chosen people. Abraham was given a promise by God that his descendants would be a great nation and that through him a blessing for all people would come into the world. And Abraham was blessed in order to be that blessing. The only problem was that Abraham and his wife Sarah were past childbearing age. And we have to go back several chapters in Genesis, back to chapter 16, to get the beginning of Hagar's story. And in that chapter, Sarai, who was later changed, her name was changed to Sarah, laments that she has not been able to give Abram any children. And so she sends her Egyptian slave girl Hagar to him, and lo and behold, Abram gets a son from Hagar, meaning Ishmael. Now Hagar starts giving Sarai some attitude, and Sarai gets jealous, and Abraham doesn't want to get in the middle of it, and so he just tells Sarai, well, do with your slave girl as you want. And Sarai deals harshly with Hagar, and Hagar runs away. So the next part of the story is from Genesis 16. I'd like to read it to you because it's really central. The angel of the Lord found her by a spring of water in the wilderness, the spring on the way to Shur. And he said, Hagar, slave girl of Sarai, where have you come from and where are you going? And she said, I am running away from my mistress Sarai. The angel of the Lord said to her, return to your mistress and submit to her. And the angel of the Lord also said to her, I will so greatly multiply your offspring that they cannot be counted for a multitude. And the angel of the Lord said to her, now you have conceived and shall bear a son, and you shall name him Ishmael, for the Lord has given heed to your affliction. He shall be a wild ass of a man, and with his hand against everyone and everyone's hand against him. and he shall live at odds with all of his kin. And the next part is really neat. So she named the Lord who spoke to her, "You are El Roy." For she said, "Have I really seen God and remained alive after seeing him?" We have to think about that for a moment. This slave girl, this person who is counted as nothing but property, names God. Have you been able to name God? Have you been able to catch a piece of God's character so well that you can give a name to it? And so here is this complete outsider who names God. And what she names God is, "You are the God who sees." God who sees. And there's some important things to note about this story. First is that this part of it foreshadows what's going to happen much later on in the story of the Jewish people when they become oppressed by the Egyptians and they cry out once again from their affliction, and God hears their cries and sends Moses to deliver them. So we see that same pattern here, that somebody is oppressed, they cry out, God hears their cry and delivers them. And here, what's interesting is that this is the beginning of that group of people, the Egyptians, that will later become the oppressor. So the one that has been set free, way down the road, becomes the oppressor, and the one that's free now becomes the oppressed. And it's this turning of things around that God does, and this is the action of God in the Jewish Testament. And second, that's important to remember about the story is that God is making the same promise to this Egyptian slave girl that God made to Abraham, that a great nation, a multitude, is going to come from her children. And Abram is promised to be that blessing to all people, and Ishmael and Hagar is promised to be the troublemaker. And the important thing to remember is that God uses both of them to bring about the divine plan of saving all humanity from the broken state that humanity found itself in. And finally, it's this less than outsider that is the first to name God. The first to see that God is one who sees us, who sees you and me, who sees the outcast, who sees the afflicted, and yet does not destroy, but instead saves. So we see in this part the beginning of the animosity that still exists in this part of the world today in the Middle East. And three of the world major religions all claim Abraham as their forebear: Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. So there is this cycle of oppression and freedom. And going back to the story that we just heard in 21, Sarah is in her old age, and she has conceived, and she gives birth to her son Isaac. And once again, Sarah gets jealous, and she wants Hagar and Ishmael to be kicked out. And this time, Abraham does it himself. And he at least gives her some provisions. And there's another similar scene of Hagar, who has lost all hope, wandering in the wilderness. The water is gone, and she puts her son under a bush and walks far away because she doesn't want to see him die. And the angel once again comes and says that God has heard the boy where he is. I love that saying. God has heard the boy where he is, because it means God sees and hears this child right now in this depressed state, in this sad and lost state. God knows what's going on. God sees the whole situation. And then El Roy, the God who sees, opens Hagar's eyes to see the wellspring there in the desert. And she and her son are saved. So what can we take away from this story of two brothers from another mother? It's rich with meaning. And while there are many lessons to learn, I want to share just a few things that stand out for me. First is that we all need to be a part of the solution of ending cycles of oppression and exclusion in our world. We need to be part of the solution and not part of the problem. The story of the Jews essentially goes like this. They start out as a nothing. Then God chooses one nomad, Abram, And through that person, God chooses to reveal God's self to the world. God's salvation will enter the world through that person. And they grow in numbers, and they become oppressed, and then they're delivered and set free, and they're brought into the land of promise, but they don't follow and obey God's law, and instead they themselves become oppressive again, and they lose all that they had. God turning things around. God is never on the side of those who use power to oppress and to control the vulnerable. Instead, God sees and hears the cries of those people and brings them out into a place of freedom. But that freedom is not a guaranteed right. It can and will be taken away if the ones who are saved become oppressive again. And so I call upon the church to take heed of this, because we are coming dangerously close to being just another oppressive force in our world. What's being passed off as Christianity is dangerously close to becoming just another oppressor. And we are dangerously close to losing the freedom that we have if we do not follow and break out of this cycle and become more than we have been. We have to work to end this cycle of violence and live out the law of love and mercy and compassion and justice. And we have to live this out individually in our individual lives, and we have to live it out collectively as a body of faithful believers. How do we do that? What do we do? That's the question we must each struggle with today. How can we set other persons or groups free? How can we stand up and resist the power that seeks its own way rather than seeking to proclaim release? What can we as a church do, and what can we as individuals do to give voice to those who have no voice and to hear their cries? And second, what I take away from this is that we have to remember who God is and what God does. As Hagar experienced, God is the God who sees. And we too must remember those times when we have experienced God in some unique way and name that experience and share that name. Can you recall the first time that you experienced God's grace in your life? Maybe it was that time when you accepted Jesus as your Savior, or maybe it was some time completely different from that, some moment when you felt and not only knew in your head, but knew in your heart that you were loved by God. In the earlier days of MCC, and even now, this is a common experience of people coming into our church and finding their place where they call home. I can't tell you how many times in my early years, people coming to MCC Tampa and saying it was just like coming home, because that's how I experienced it. And that experience of coming home to the God who sees and knows and loves is our experience as MCC. And so we have to remember those times when God has heard and delivered us and share them so that others coming in can experience them as well. Not so that we can become a bigger and bigger group and that we can then become us versus them again and we have more power so we can then point the finger and do just what we've done before. And we have to share because that's what we're born to do. That's what we're created to do. To lift the whole world, the whole creation up to that image of what God intended it to be to begin with. And we do that by sharing our experience of who this God is. And finally, we have to learn how to see one another as God sees. We have to find that common ground of our humanity. This doesn't mean we ignore our differences. We can't ignore our differences, nor should we. We have to accept those differences. I can't look at you and say, I don't see your skin color, or I don't see your gender, or I don't see your ethnicity. Because to do so would deny a complete and huge part of who you are. Not the only part, but a big part of who you are. So we cannot just explain away our differences and say we don't see them and say we're all the same, because we're not. Instead, we have to start from that place of commonality. We are all human. And then embrace all of the other stuff that makes us unique. And embrace it and celebrate it. And celebrate each person as a whole person. Not just as what's on the outside. Not just what's on the inside. but the whole package, because that's how God sees us. Not as just a pawn or a thing or a this or a that, but as a unique and beloved creation, brought into existence and never existed before, never will exist again. That's how God sees us and how we have to see one another. This is hard because we're so conditioned to see only the surface and to then start applying names and labels and stereotypes. Meeting somebody outside of our preconceived notions is dangerous. It's scary because they might destroy us. They might be more powerful, they might be stronger, bigger, whatever. But they could just as easily be there to save us. And when we start from the assumption that the other person is really our brother or sister from a different parent, then we'll be much more likely to discover the help we need at exactly the time we need it. Would you pray with me? Loving God, we thank you that you have given us this story of this brave woman who came from such small and difficult circumstances, and yet you used her as you use each and every one of us as part of your plan of salvation of this world and this creation. Help us to see one another the way you see us. Help us to be a part of your plan. Guide us, inspire us, challenge us, and move us. As we pray in your name, the name of Jesus.